Hi everyone and welcome. The Medieval Reader recently did a tag. She created a tag called the Commonplace Book Tag, and so I wasn't real familiar with the term of what a commonplace book is, so I looked it up, and the Thought Catalog online gives the definition of a commonplace book is a central resource or depository for ideas, quotes, anecdotes, observations, and information that you come across during reading. So, as it turns out, I have been keeping a commonplace book for a couple of years now. This is my current one that I'm using. It's really just, one of these paper books. And, for example, this is the notes from whenever I was reading Thoughts on a Dark Corner, that essay collection I did a book chat on. Here's some thoughts I was jotting down when I was coming up with reading goals for 2017. Just what each kind of work, and sometimes operas and other kind of art forms that I've seen, movies. I may, grab this book. I usually have this book somewhere nearby, and I can really devote, it's not really in depth. It's just sort of an outline of what the book was, why I, thought I needed to read it, and then basically an outline kind of what it's about, what's in it, and then, kind of my thoughts on the book, sort of how I relate it to other books, other works. Sometimes I write out quotes. Or I will refer to quotes on a certain page, refer to quote whatever, if it was something important. So I found it to be really, super helpful. But anyway, enough on the commonplace book. The tag itself is, the challenge is to come up with three quotes that, you would have considered important, and why you consider them important. So the first one that I'm going to talk about, let me just pull up the cover so you can see it. Here is from 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami, which I read this a number of years ago. And the quote is, "It's 1Q84 now. The air has changed. The scene has changed. I have to adapt to this world with a question mark as soon as I can. Like an animal released into a new forest. In order to protect myself and survive, I have to learn the rules of this place and adapt myself to them." Now, I know that quote isn't really profound. It doesn't sound that profound, and it doesn't sound that beautiful, but it's actually had this lasting impact in my life, because what happens in the novel 1Q84 is the main character finds that he has been transported into a slightly different reality, and it takes him a while to notice that this reality is not quite his own. The other reality that he has two moons in it, and so at first he's puzzled why there are two moons, but it slowly dawns on him that he's not where he belongs. He's not in his normal world. And so how I have applied this to my life is, particularly in my life, there are places and people that I need to go and interact with sometimes that are that don't really share a lot, that I don't really share a lot with. I don't share necessarily some of the same values even, but yet I have to sort of walk in that world sometimes, and so it's sort of become a standing phrase for me. This is the 1Q. It's 1Q84 now, which is the opening line of that. It's 1Q84 now. So I know then if it's 1Q84 time, then I'm going to walk in a different reality that it doesn't impact me, because this character in the novel, is able to disengage himself from that world that he doesn't belong in, because he knows that his journey through it is going to be temporary, and so he doesn't have any really anxiety. Or this is how I interpret that. This is how I interpret that quote. You can sort of walk through this world, these worlds that you don't belong in and don't want to be in. You want to get back to your regular world, but it's really their world that you're in at that moment, and so you just you'll just journey through it. You'll adapt to it while you're there, but then you'll leave, and it won't. You'll adapt to it, not adopt it. So I think that's the difference. So that's why I chose that quote, and I think that's why that quote lives with me so much. It's 1Q84 now. So yeah, the second quote that I'm going to discuss comes from, let me get the cover. It's from the Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. I read this the beginning of last year, so it's fairly new. But Fernando Pessoa, if you not familiar with him, was a Portuguese writer and intellectual and poet who died in 1935, and the Book of Disquiet was not published during his life. It did not get translated over for us in English until the 1980s. But it's a beautiful work, and there's actually a lot to choose from that work, but I chose this one because it's one of those quotes that have really stuck with me. So the full quote is, "Inch by inch I conquered the inner terrain I was born with. Bit by bit I reclaimed the swamp in which I'd languished. I gave birth to my definitive being, but I had to wrench myself out of me with forceps." So that last part, I had to wrench myself out of me with forceps, is what's stuck with me because, becoming the person you want to be sometimes is a struggle, and living that life that you want to live, sometimes you have to go against a lot of other forces around you. So that's I say sometimes it's time for me to wrench myself out of me with forceps. So it's not always easy, but I think it's just such a wonderful quote. And Fernando Pessoa was such an interesting person. So the context of that, if you're not familiar with him, I've mentioned him on multiple other videos, but he had around 72 different, he called them heteronyms. There were different aspects of himself that wrote their own poetry and wrote their own works. And just an amazing person. There's another quote that I actually almost chose that along those same lines. It says, "In the vast colony of our being, there are many species of people who think and feel in different ways." So I love that quote too. In the vast colony of our being, there are many species of people, because he was this very singular person, Pessoa, but he embraced this multiplicity of life as well. So I think it's very cool. So yeah. So then the third one, let me pull it up. I have all of three of these works I have read electronically, so I have electronic editions for them. This one doesn't have a very pretty cover because it's just a sort of a it's a kind of a free Gutenberg press kind of thing. Middlemarch by George Eliot. So the quote from Middlemarch that has stuck with me for years is, "For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." So I think I might have actually used this quote in other videos, so it might be a repetition for some, but this quote, I never get tired of it. When I first read Middlemarch, I kind of read through it pretty quickly, and this is actually in the last paragraph of the book. And that last paragraph just hit me, and then I immediately realized that I had not I talked about this in the slow reads tag. It hit me, that I needed to reread that I had not gotten everything that I needed to get from that work based on this last sentence, really. So yeah, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. So, if you've seen much of my channel, you see that I do read a lot of history and the great sort of movements of society is actually done by average everyday people for the most part that we don't know about, that are lost to history. And, I think this quote is so beautiful because to me it really highlights that, yes, my life, I might not be an important person that's changing things in a, major way, the leader of some, initiative or some reform or something like that, but nevertheless, it's important, for me to live a good life. If I live a good life, I contribute overall, just like this quote says, that, that things, that things change, basically, and that things are better than they otherwise would have been, largely to these forgotten people, and that's okay. You know, that the goal is not really to be necessarily remembered; it's to just to have lived as good a life as you can. So that's sort of what I take away from this quote and why I love it so much. So there were a lot of options for quotes that I could use. I might, you know, later on down the road, I chose these three because I've applied these so directly to practical things in my life. You know, there's lots of other quotes that could be chosen, and so it's kind of a fun tag to do. So, you know, step 3 in this process is to tag someone. I'm not sure who all has been tagged already, so who I decided to tag is a person who comments quite a bit on my videos, and her name is Lillian, or her channel is Lillian Nieswender, and I hope I pronounced that right. But Lillian does not do videos, but she does comment a lot, and she reads a lot of interesting things, has read a lot of interesting things, and so I'm real curious what she might say. So Lillian, if this is interesting to you and you feel like you want to respond, then please do so in the comments below. So I will leave it at that. Until next time, take care.